Good morning, everybody. So my name is Cynthia Conti-Cook, and I'm an attorney in the Special Litigation Unit of the Legal Aid Society. Legal Aid Society is the primary public defender in New York City. We represent clients in all 5 boroughs. And as a part of the Special Litigation Unit, one of my responsibilities is to come up with tools for our defenders to help them in their cases, to help them investigate, and to help them prepare for trial. In that capacity, one of the things that I've developed is a technological tool, a database, for our defenders to use while investigating police officers. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to sort of start with the idea of open data policing, open data for the tech side of us. I think we all know is open data or open source refers to the idea that the source is open, that it's something that can be replicated and looked at. In terms of public interest, and I think Jason has actually put this best, that open data refers to a theory of governing where people have access to the process, decision making, and data for a more effective ecosystem for innovation and development.
I said that?
Yeah.
Great.
And so in that context, I'd like to borrow that and use it for policing. And so open data policing, I think, would be a place where there is a level playing field for both the defenders who are trying to pursue their cases and fight in court, and also for the public in having information in order to make informed policy decisions about police reform. So the tool that was supposed to bring fairness to the criminal justice system and to policing following Ferguson were body cameras, right? That was what was going to make clear what actually happened during an incident and sort of be the thing that saved us in terms of the silence of the blue wall. But fast forward to Charlotte just a month ago, and there were marchers chanting, "No tapes, no peace." The police chief did eventually turn over those tapes, but the headline when he turned it over was that this is the last time you're going to see recordings from North Carolina. And that was because North Carolina passed a law last July that made body cameras exempt from public disclosure. And so I think that where there is no transparency and there is no open data, we are still going to see a lot of the problems with policing that we've seen in this country, and that has been a lot more visible in this country for the past 2 years. And so why does this matter? What is it about having access to this data on a regular basis? It's the difference between what happened in any one incident and what is happening. So what is happening, not just including what is happening to, for example, our clients on a daily basis. And to get at this, I want to compare Chicago and New York City. So after 7 years of litigation, the Chicago Citizens Data Project, Police Data Project, launched a website that included years and years worth of officers' misconduct records. And these were internal complaints. These were not lawsuits. These were not news information about police officers, but these were just internal complaints from the police department that they finally got access to after litigating. I realize this is hard to see. If you go to the Citizens Police Data Project, you can see it. But the point is that several weeks after the launch of this website, the video of Laquan McDonald was released. And at the moment that was released, everyone in Chicago could then go to a website and see that officer's misconduct history. And what they saw was that officer had 20 unsubstantiated complaints. And the connection that the residents of Chicago were then able to make was that this was a systemic problem, and that the accountability system in Chicago was also at fault for Laquan McDonald's death. As a result, not only was Jason Van Dyke indicted and fired, but the city was able to look at what was happening and not just at what happened. There was a forced resignation of the police chief, the Cook County district attorney, who lost an election to an otherwise unforeseeable candidate, a political novice, and significantly, by 30% of the vote. Mayor Emanuel himself was called upon to step down and his popularity rating went way down. This was all evidence of a city that's actually grappling with the systemic issues behind what happened, and not just, what angle was the gun at, and the peculiarities of what happened during that shooting. The policymakers were actually called into account, and there was a task force initiated to study police reform. And this happens every day, right? Imagine being a public defender then in Chicago and having access to this type of information. Now compare that to New York City. In New York City, there's been no records of Officer Pantaleo, who killed Eric Garner, made available. There was no indictment. There were no resignations. It was released recently that Pantaleo actually made $20,000 in overtime. And there hasn't been a single police reform piece of legislation passed in the city council. And so unlike Chicago, we have been unable to grapple with these more systemic problems. And so now think about this in terms of being a public defender in New York City and not having the access that a public defender in Chicago has to investigate and prepare for your trial with the same amount of information. So if you are representing someone like Eric Garner, who's accused of something like selling Lucy's, by an officer like Officer Pantaleo, you have no way to ask questions about whether that officer had prior bad acts, had prior bad stops, which was released recently, that there was a substantiated CCRB complaint about him having a bad stop. That type of information is not available in New York City to public defenders. And so what do? We definitely fight in court. We do the things lawyers have done, and we are currently fighting for Officer Pantaleo's records to be publicly disclosed. Fight in the legislature. We are also working on a legislative effort to actually reform the laws that make police records secret in New York City. But we also have a database. And the database for the Legal Aid Society was created to fill this void. And because we have public defenders who are in court every day trying to investigate their cases, to counsel their clients intelligently, and to prepare for trial, they needed to have this information, and not at the typical moments when they get it in trial, which is like the moment before trial. And so this database, for example, one of our clients was recently at arraignment. He had bail set at $100,000. And the attorney wrote a writ, included information from the database that actually got at the officer's credibility and reliability in prior cases where they've been accused of misconduct. And that information led another judge to release that man on his own recognizance. We had another another defender who used this information at trial, and she came into trial every day more prepared with more information about this officer's history than the DA, than the prosecutor. That same attorney had another case where she was able to actually use this information and just leveraging during negotiations. And the prosecutor in that case actually started to refer to the officer as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then that prosecutor actually stepped down from being a prosecutor and went to work at the Department of Investigation, investigating police corruption. I don't know that we can take complete credit for that, but it changed the narrative, right? It changed the narrative in every one of those cases, so much so that one of the prosecutors actually changed her view of the officer that she had formerly been relying on. Now, this is all very well and good in individual cases, but it's also really important on a policy level. I'm almost done. We can ask questions. These are settled lawsuits from the past, from 2015. We can ask questions about where are larger lawsuits coming from versus where are a whole lot of small lawsuits coming from. We can also make social network connections between publicly available information like lawsuits and see where the big dots are police officers that have had multiple lawsuits versus the officers that are just here and there have been sued probably because they were partnering with an officer who was otherwise causing a lot of lawsuits. So I'll leave you with that. I realize I'm over time. But the point is that transparency, according to this chief, right, is in the eye of not the beholder, but the holder of the information. And the project of the Legal Aid Society's database has been to change that equation so that the holder of that transparency is not only in the hands of police, it's in the hands of our clients, and that so is justice.